Yeah! Thank God for fantasy football. I'm Buster Brown, and the show, it's called Redemption Rehab. And if you tuned in today, it's for one reason. It's to start winning championships in fantasy football. Here we are on our website, fantasyfootballredemptionrehab.com. When you get a chance, check it out. Today, we're talking about our waiver wire report. We spent all year showing you who to draft, when to draft them, so you can win a championship in fantasy football. But it doesn't end with just our draft. We have to start picking up players during the season to help you win a championship in 2020. We've got some great picks for you today at all position players. Whether it's quarterback, running back, wide receiver, or tight end, we found some sleepers that are going to help you win a trophy in 2020. So buckle up, get out your popcorn, and let's head over to the chalkboard
and check out the facts.
Okay, here we are on ESPN.com, checking out the box scores for all the games and the players we're going to talk about in week 3 of the NFL season. We always start out our weekly waiver wire report with running backs. Last week, we gave you some great players like Devontae Freeman. We told you should pick him up. He signed with the Giants to replace Saquon Barkley. Another guy we told you about last week who had another good week for the Los Angeles Chargers was Joshua Culley. Hopefully you went out and got him. A few more players we mentioned last week that also had good weeks were Frank Gore, Myles Gaskin for the Miami Dolphins, and Jerick McKinnon for the San Francisco 49ers. You gotta watch our show every week if you want these players. They all went out last week and put up some points for the teams they play for. Let's take a look at some guys you must have to add to your lineup on the waiver wire for week 3 of the NFL season. Starting with this guy, Darrell Henderson Jr. Darrell Henderson Jr. had 12 carries for 81 yards and a touchdown. He also had 2 catches for 48 yards on 3 targets. Why do we like him so much? Well, the starting running back, Cam Akers, he's got a rib injury. He's going to miss a few weeks. I don't expect him to play this week or next. And the other guy who was playing well, Malcolm Brown, he had to have surgery on his pinky. He might miss some time there. Let's go take a look at some other running backs besides Darrell Henderson Jr. that you should be looking at in week 3 of the NFL season. Okay, here we are looking at the Carolina box score. We tell you before every draft, when you draft a premium player like a Christian McCaffrey, always have their handcuff at the end of the draft so you don't end up in a situation where you have to pick one up on the waiver wire. This year was a little more difficult because we didn't know who his handcuff was, but we found out on last Sunday, and it was Mike Davis. Mike Davis only had 1 carry for 1 yard. I'm not high on him as far as a running back goes, but look what he did in the receiving game. He's down here. He had 8 receptions for 74 yards on 8 targets. There's a guy out there named Reggie Bonifone. He's on the practice squad. He's coming up, so between the two of them, I would go out and maybe pick up Mike Davis if you have Christian McCaffrey. If you don't, you can still pick up this guy, but I got to warn you right now, he might not produce. He was cut last year from Chicago, didn't play much the rest of the season for whoever had him on his team, and he might be going on towards the end of his career. So I wouldn't spend a ton of money, but while Christian McCaffrey's out, he might be the best next available player. Let's go take another look at another team that lost a major player. Okay, here we are looking at the box score on ESPN for the New York Giants. They lost Saquon Barkley for the year. If you had taken his backup, whether it's Dion Lewis or Wayne Gallman, we always tell you to grab a handcuff, you'd be okay. But if you didn't, these are the players you need to go out and get. Dion Lewis is the only guy that was active. Dion Lewis had 10 carries for 20 yards and a touchdown. He also does what he does best. He used to play for the New England Patriots, won some Super Bowls, and he catches the ball out of the backfield. He had 4 catches for 36 yards on 5 targets. Okay, you drafted Saquon Barkley and he's out for the year. It's a tough deal. It's happened to me many, many times. What you need to do is see if you can get their handcuffs. You should have drafted him, but maybe you didn't. Wayne Gallman is probably his handcuff. He was inactive against Chicago, but if you can get Dion Lewis or Wayne Gallman, that's who I'd suggest. However, they signed Devontae Freeman. Devontae Freeman's probably not going to see the field for a couple weeks because he got to go through COVID-19 deal. But when he does play, he's got to learn the playbook. So you got about maybe 2-3 weeks before Devontae Freeman kicks into gear, maybe a month. So those are the 3 players you're looking at. You should grab one of them, especially if you have Saquon Barkley on your roster who's out for the year. Let me give you some deep sleepers. I would maybe pick him up here next week or the week after. You got to do it before there's an injury. But Jordan Wilkins for the Indianapolis Colts. I also like Darwin Thompson of the Kansas City Chiefs. If there's an injury to their starting running back, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, this guy might get some playing time. And down in Atlanta, Todd Gurley seems to not be playing as much as he should be. He should have been in that Dallas game late, but he wasn't. And I like Ito Smith and Brian Hill. If something happens to Todd Gurley, which is likely, you might want to stash one of these 2 guys on your bench for later in the year. Let's go take a look at some wide receivers we think you should be looking at in week 3 of the NFL season. Okay, here we are on ESPN checking out the box scores. Guys we mentioned last week that you should have went out and got. One of them was Russell Gage. He got a touchdown last week, and we told you he was going to have a big year. We liked him in the preseason. He proved us right. If you could still get Russell Gage, go out and get him. Other guys we liked from last week were N'Keal Harry of the New England Patriots. This guy is going to be a big-time receiver in the NFL. If he's on your waiver wire, go get him. We mentioned him last week, and he had another good game against Seattle. And even though this other guy didn't have a good game, his name's Scotty Miller. You know how Tom Brady likes those guys in the slot. Scotty Miller didn't produce last week, but he will down the road. And another guy we like on Tampa Bay is named Justin Watson. Keep an eye on him too. But if you see the box score behind me, last week we mentioned Adam Humphries and Corey Davis. And if you look down here, both of them scored a touchdown. Adam Humphries was 5 for 48 and a touchdown. Corey Davis had 3 catches for 36 yards and a touchdown on 5 targets. Hey, these, with Brown out, who's their main wide receiver, these guys got to pick up the slack. We mentioned Jonnu Smith. We'll get to him in tight ends. Look what he did. Look, when a major player is out, somebody's got to pick up the slack. We mentioned that Saquon Barkley's out. We mentioned Christian McCaffrey's out, and we thought, hey, let's go out and pick up some running backs to replace them. You know who's going to benefit from those guys being out? The quarterbacks are going to have to throw the ball a lot more. So I would be going out and getting their quarterbacks for the Giants and the Carolina Panthers. You know who else is going to benefit? Their wide receivers and tight ends. Why? Because they can't run the ball. Sometimes you have to think outside the box in fantasy football. You just can't go pick up a running back, like I mentioned earlier, and think they're going to step right in and be the next Christian McCaffrey. It doesn't work that way. Anyways, we're talking wide receivers. Some other wide receivers we mentioned last week was this guy over here, Laviska Shenault. You should have picked him up. He might have a good year. Then again, he only was 3 catches for 35 yards on 4 targets. But there's some other wide receivers on Jacksonville you should keep an eye on, like these 2 guys. DJ Chark may have gotten hurt. I heard he's on the injury report this week, so I do like Keelan Cole Sr., who had a touchdown last week, who was 6 for 58 for a touchdown this week on 7 targets, and Chris Connolly, who had a good year last year. He had 4 catches for 48 yards on 7 targets. Look, somebody's going to pick up the slack when a major player's hurt. They don't have a good running game, even though we mentioned last week you pick up James Robinson. He's one of the running backs we mentioned last week. Look what he did. 16 carries, 102 yards, and a TD. You should have went out and got him. We mentioned him in our waiver wire report. Hopefully you you took our advice and went out and got him. The tight ends here might be worth looking at. I'm not a big fan because they split it, but I just wanted to mention them since we're on this box score. James O'Shaughnessy and Tyler Eifert. They might get some look-sees during the year, so in DFS, you may want to consider them. When we come back, we're going to take a look at some other wide receivers you should be thinking about in week 3 of the NFL season. Okay, here we are looking at some of the wide receivers on the waiver wire for week 3. And the box score behind us, we have the Buffalo Bills against the Miami Dolphins. We like some players in this game. Let's get into it. Last week we told you about running back Myles Gaskin. 7 for 46, that's not too bad. But down here you could see he had a good game catching the ball out of the backfield. 6 for 36 on 7 targets. We're talking wide receivers on the waiver wire, but since we had this box score up, I wanted to show you Myles Gaskin and why we think you should go out and get him again this week. But there's a couple wide receivers we want to talk about here. This guy over here, Cole Beasley, was 5 catches for 70 yards on 6 targets. He's been in the league forever. He used to play for the Cowboys. He's a possession receiver, doesn't get a lot of touchdowns, and usually catches that 5 to 15 yard pass from the quarterback. So I like him. In a pinch, you can get him. And this guy over here, Isaiah Ford, he had a decent game last week, but look what he did this week. 7 catches for 76 yards on 9 targets. Why did he get so much look-see? It's because Devontae Parker's dealing with a hamstring injury, and he's not going to get to play as much. And he's kind of like the 3rd option, 4th option, 5th option maybe on this team. The guy I really like is Mike Gesicki. We've been telling you about him at tight end for years. And look, 8 catches, 130 yards, and a touchdown. Tight ends usually take 2-3 years to come along. Here's Mike Gesicki. Go out and get him if he's available for sure. And the guy we really like, though, is Isaiah Ford. And if you get a chance, we liked Preston Williams. Last year, he had a torn ACL. And he's just now coming back in the form. But every time Preston Williams plays, he usually goes up against one of the better cornerbacks in the league. And the last 2 weeks, he went against New England and Miami, and they got good cornerbacks. So if you could kind of make a trade to get him, I think you'll see him come on later in the year. Otherwise, I'd be looking at Isaiah Ford on the waiver wire and get him in your lineup. When we come back, we're going to give you some sleeper picks we like for week 3. Okay, here we are back on ESPN, checking out the box score for the Minnesota Vikings against the Indianapolis Colts. When Paris Campbell got hurt, he sprained his MCL and PCL, and I'll tell you what, I bet he missed at least 4 to 6 weeks. That's a tough injury. He's not going to be out for the year, but somebody's got to replace this guy. And these 2 guys down here, a couple sleepers you should consider picking up. You want to maybe consider Michael Pittman Jr., who had 4 catches for 37 yards on 6 targets, or Zach Pascal. He had 3 catches for 19 yards on 4 targets and a touchdown. Another guy, when we talk tight ends, we won't get a chance to mention him, but it's Mo Alley-Cox. Look at this, 5 catches, 111 yards on 6 targets. When Jack Doyle went out, this is the guy that took his spot. He's a good tight end, and I hear Phillip Rivers loves him. There's a couple sleepers you can get on the Colts because of injury. I suggest you go out and get them. Let me give you some other sleepers at wide receiver you should consider for week 3. Like Brandon Ayuk of the San Francisco 49ers. Who else do they have to throw the ball to in San Francisco? This kid's a player. Go out and stash him on your bench. Or how about Jalen Reagor for the Philadelphia Eagles? They got to throw the ball to somebody at wide receiver. This kid was a 1st round or 2nd round draft choice for Philadelphia. He's got to step up, and I think he will. A couple others I like. Jake Hamler in Denver. This was a 2nd round pick for the Denver Broncos, and Denver Broncos are losing some of their really good wide receivers to injury, among other players. So make sure you keep an eye on Jake Hamler. And let's not forget about Chase Claypool down in Pittsburgh. This guy had a huge touchdown pass. He's going to be the next big thing in Pittsburgh. He might not be a starter all year, but don't be surprised if he has a big game every once in a while. Another player I kind of like who played on Monday night, his name is Traquan Smith. With Michael Thomas out, this guy had 5 catches for 80 yards, You might want to consider picking him up, but then again, when Michael Thomas comes back, he's probably not going to get to play. And I expect Michael Thomas back within a week or two. When we come back, we've got some great tight ends we like for this week. Okay, here we are checking out tight ends. Last week we mentioned Jonnu Smith of the Tennessee Titans. We told you to go out and get him, and he had 2 touchdowns. He had a huge day. Another guy we mentioned was Jordan Reed. He had 2 touchdowns. He had a big day. You should have went out and picked him up. A couple others we mentioned last week were Logan Thomas. He had a quiet day. So did O.J. Howard. But I think these guys are worth picking up and putting in your lineups. We mentioned Mo Alley Cox from the Indianapolis Colts when we talked about wide receivers. Go out and consider him in week 3. And this guy from the Dallas Cowboys. His name is Dalton Schultz. Check his stat line out. 9 receptions, 88 yards, and a touchdown on 10 targets. He led the team in targets. I think you got to pick the guy up. I mean, why not? I mean, 10 targets, that's a big day. That's a big day. This guy's going to be on your waiver wire. I think you should go pick him up and stash him on your bench. Let's check out another guy I think you should stash on your bench. Here we are, checking out the box score on ESPN from the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cleveland Browns last Thursday. Check out this tight end's box score. His name is Drew Sample. He had 7 catches for 45 yards on 9 targets. He's not going to light it up every game. He's got a lot of talent on Cincinnati, but Joe Burrows likes him. He was throwing the ball to this guy who we suggested in the preseason, CJ Uzomah, who had 4 catches for 42 yards and a touchdown. But CJ Uzomah blew out his Achilles tendon in this game. He's not playing no more this year. That would have been a good pickup. A sleeper I like for later in the year is this guy over here too, Harrison Bryant. He only had 2 targets for 14 yards. You keep an eye on this kid, Harrison Bryant. He might not have a good year this year, but down the road, you're going to remember that name. Let's take a look at one more guy you should be considering at tight end in week 3. Okay, here we are back looking at the box score from the Baltimore Ravens against the Houston Texans. If you want a deep sleeper at tight end, it's this guy, Jordan Akins. He had 7 catches for 55 yards on 7 targets. The Houston Texans like to play with a 12 personnel package. That means they like to play with 2 tight ends. So a lot of times you get Jordan Akins in the game and this guy, Darren Fells, who also had 2 catches for 23 yards and a touchdown. These are the guys that they target near the end zone. So one of them might be worth stashing on your bench, especially in need of a tight end. When we come back, we're going to take a look at some sleeper players at quarterback and defense that you should be considering for week 3. Okay, here we are looking at some quarterbacks you should consider for week 3 on your waiver wire. It's got to be with Joe Burrows right here, man. Look what he did against Cleveland. He threw the ball 61 times for 316 yards and 3 touchdowns with no interceptions. He's got a good game against Philadelphia. Their secondary is actually pretty good in Philadelphia, so I think that he's worth putting on your bench and for later in the season. I also think you should consider Baker Mayfield. Look, 16 of 23, 2 touchdowns, 219 yards. He's not going to light it up, but if you need a quarterback for a week, one of these 2 guys should help you. So in week 3 of the waiver wire, consider both of these guys. When we come back, we're going to show you a defense we like for week 3 of the NFL season. Okay, here we are looking at some defenses you should be considering in week 3 of the NFL season. I got 2 of them for you. One is right here with the Indianapolis Colts against the New York Jets. Jets are banged up all the way around. Colts have a good defense. Their secondary's not so hot, but they got a good front 7, and I'll tell you what, I think they're going to put a hurting on the Jets. Another team that's banged up is these guys, the Denver Broncos. Seems like they're losing players left and right along with the Jets, and they play up against a fierce Tampa Bay defense. So my suggestions in week 3 are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, if they're on your waiver wire, or the Indianapolis Colts. Okay, that's it. Here we are back on our website, fantasyfootballredemptionrehab.com. When you get a chance, check it out. That's it for the waiver wire report. We gave you some great players at running back that you have to take a peek at this week. We gave you some players at wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, and defense that should help you take home a victory this week. I'm Buster Brown. The show, it's called Redemption Rehab. Good luck.